Peter Protection Protocol by J.A. Worley on AO3. Ned is Peter's guy in the chair. It's been that way from nearly the start. After the bite, it only took Ned a few weeks to figure out that something was going on with his best friend, and while it had surprised him to find out that something was Peter swinging around the city acting as a vigilante, he knew from that moment what he had to do. He had to help him. Peter's life is awesome. He's Spider-Man. He goes off and fights Avengers in Germany and gets to go to Stark Tower for lab days with Mr. Stark. He has this entire life that Ned only wishes he could have. But Ned's life is awesome too, because Peter lets him be a part of that crazy superhero life. From the day Ned caught Peter coming in through his bedroom window in his homemade spider suit, Ned has been his guy in the chair. Being Spider-Man's sidekick is kind of Ned's thing. Ned calls Mr. Stark when Peter climbs through his bedroom window late at night once a month with a stab wound or other injury. He has police scanner apps on his phone and directs Peter to crimes happening around Queens. He covers for Peter when he can't make it to Acadec, or to school, or when he randomly takes off during field trips. In the last 6 months, Ned has taught himself an impressive amount of hacking skills, has taken a first aid and CPR class, and has watched dozens of videos on stitching people up, despite that he hasn't had to do that yet and hopes he never has to. Ned is, in a word, the best. Even Peter thinks he's the best sidekick ever. Peter even has Ned listed in his phone as guy in the chair. So when their Acadec team walks into Stark Industries to check in for their field trip, something Mr. Stark had set up, and they find Mr. Stark being held hostage with a knife to his throat, Ned only freaks out a little, unlike the kids beside him who are in tears. He's used to things like this happening. He's used to emergencies and people being in danger. A hostage situation is new, but hey, it's all part of his training to make sure he continues to be the best guy in the chair Peter could ever ask for, right? "Everyone just stay put," one of the masked men shouts at the group of people in the lobby. "Lock the front doors," Tony says, but he stiffens when the man holding him from behind pushes the knife into his throat and a little bead of blood starts to dribble down. "Shut up!" "It'll keep more people from coming in," Tony says. "I said shut up!" The man pulls the knife away just long enough to hit Tony in the back of the head. Tony grunts and stumbles forward a little, but the masked man doesn't let him fall as he tightens his grip on him again. "Fangs, lock this place down!" Ned watches with bated breath along with the rest of his class and the 20 tower employees currently in the lobby, as a second man, this one without a mask, goes to the front doors to see if he can figure out how to lock them. Ned can see why he's called Fangs. He's enhanced somehow and he has huge fangs like a vampire. His hair is all messed up like maybe he's been living on the streets, and his clothes are wrinkled as well. "This is what's going to happen," says the guy with the knife. "Everybody's going to move over along that wall. You're going to sit down, shut up, and wait until we take care of business with Mr. Stark here. Yeah?" When people don't start to move right away, frozen with fear, he yells, "Now!" Mr. Harrington starts to usher their class towards the wall along with the other employees. Ned looks at Peter and finds his eyes darting from one masked man to the other, and then to a third and fourth, who have been quiet up to that point. As they reach the wall, he looks at Ned and motions with his head towards a door to a stairwell that is 10 feet away. He and Peter have been friends since the first day of their freshman year in high school, and he's been Peter's guy in the chair for 9 months. He knows what Peter wants to do, and he knows he's coming along. As the rest of the people in the lobby hurry towards the wall, the eyes of the masked men are on them. It's just enough of a distraction for Peter and Ned to edge along the back of the group and to the door. Peter eases it open, and he and Ned slip inside. Peter makes sure as the door falls shut that it does so quietly. They don't wait to see if the attackers have noticed that they're gone. They hit the stairwell, running. "What are we doing?" Ned asks. "We can take the elevator on the next floor up to the lab." Ned is thankful that Peter doesn't plan on running all the way up through the tower. As they pop out on the next floor, however, they find that the elevators are on lockdown due to the hostage situation. "Friday," Peter calls out, and Ned can hear the stress in his friend's voice. Hearing Peter stressed out makes him feel stressed out. They're not in the lobby facing down the masked men anymore, but their friends are, and so is Mr. Stark. "Foothold protocol is in place, Peter." "I know. Let me use the elevator." "That requires authorization from Boss, Mr. Hogan, or Mrs. Boss." Peter pulls out his phone and dials Pepper, but she doesn't answer. He calls Happy too, but Happy doesn't pick up. Peter sucks in a deep breath and then leans forward towards the elevator. He puts his hand on it and starts patting it gently, almost as though Friday is present with them there. "Friday," Peter says, doing his best to calm his voice, Mr. Stark is in trouble. I have a plan to help him, but I need to get up to the lab. If you don't let me use the elevator, I'm going to break a window and climb up the outside of the tower, and you know how he doesn't like me to do that." Foothold Protocol automatically initiates the Peter Protection Protocol. Peter growls in frustration. What does that even do? Peter Protection Protocol, along with Pepper Protection Protocol, make it my primary function to protect you and Mrs. Boss. "Isn't there a protocol to protect Mr. Stark?" Peter asks, staring at the ceiling. "No." "Shouldn't there be?" he demands. Friday doesn't answer, and Ned thinks she's not going to, and that they'll have to continue up through the tower on foot, something he's definitely not looking forward to. They're both surprised when, a moment later, the elevator door opens for them. Peter doesn't question it and hurries inside, reaching out to hold the door for Ned even though it's not necessary because Friday isn't trying to close it. "Take us to his lab," Peter says. The elevator doors close and they start to rise. Peter Protection Protocol is still in place. "I know. Can't you just suspend it for a little while so I can save Mr. Stark?" "No." "Okay." Peter trails off. "Okay," he says again, "but you'll give us access to the lab, right?" "My subroutines indicate that the safest place for you and your friend is in Mr. Stark's lab." "She's going to lock us in there," Ned says. "Don't give her ideas," Peter huffs. "Where's Happy and Miss Pepper? Why didn't they answer my calls?" Mr. Hogan was out on an errand. He is currently locked out of the tower. Mrs. Boss is locked in the boardroom with 9 other people and her bodyguard. Cell phone communications within the tower have been cut off by a jamming signal put in place by the attackers. "Can we shut that off?" Peter asks. "No, it is a device not connected to my systems." She lets them out on the 92nd floor, and Peter and Ned hurry down the darkened hall to Mr. Stark's lab. Peter enters his access code into the keypad and opens the door. He wedges a toolbox in the door to keep it from closing all the way, and to prevent Friday from locking them inside. Ned wants to stop and look at all the amazing things in the huge lab, but he's not supposed to be Ned Leeds right now. He's supposed to be Peter's guy in the chair. "Holotable up," Peter says, and a blue holographic screen comes to life above a metal workbench. Peter pulls over a keyboard and starts tapping out commands into it. Within a few moments, the security feed of the lobby comes up on screen. He and Ned stare at it for a few moments, and then Peter pushes the keyboard over to him. "See if you can disable the jamming device. Friday, help Ned if he needs help. Can you give him my access rights?" "You have authorization to authorize other users into the system." "Good. Give Ned my clearance level." Peter hurries away down to the other end of the mostly dark lab, and Ned stares up at the holoscreen, fingers hovering above the keyboard. "This is so cool," he breathes. Peter hears him, because of course he does, and calls out, irritated, "Ned!" Okay, right, let me just..." He takes a moment to stare around the lab and appreciate the fact that he's in Tony Stark's lab, probably using his keyboard and getting help from his AI. "Friday, can you show me the device and tell me about it?" Level gold access granted to Ned Leeds. "Welcome, Mr. Leeds." "Freaking cool," Ned says. "Show him a list of commands and keep it up on screen for him, Fry," Peter calls out, and a moment later a list of commands available to Ned to type in appears on screen. Ned takes a few moments to read it over, though his eyes keep flickering to the security feed of what's happening in the lobby. Everyone is sitting quietly along the wall, aside from Tony, who still has a knife to his throat. "What do they want?" Ned asks. $7 million and schematics for the current Iron Man armor. "Do we give it to them?" Ned calls out, not looking to see what it is that Peter is doing. "Mr. Stark might tell them he's giving it to them," Peter says. "He's probably got other plans, though." The sound of something heavy hitting the metal floor meets Ned's ears. He hears a clunk, clunk, and turns towards the sound. Peter is in the Iron Man suit. "Dude, no way," he breathes. "I'm going down there. Keep trying to break the jamming signal. See if there's anything you can do to distract the bad guys." "Like what?" "I don't know," Peter says. He lifts one hand up in the armor and flexes it, and then the other. "Can you even fly that thing?" Ned asks. "Do you know what you're doing?" Up until this point, he hadn't realized that Peter had access to the Iron Man suits. Yes?" Why does that sound like a question? "I'll figure it out. Is there a training wheels protocol on the suits, Friday?" "No, Peter. Boss never intended to let you use his suits." Then why am I biocoded to get in them? Friday doesn't respond, and Peter says, "Close the faceplate." The faceplate flips closed, and the next time Peter speaks, his voice comes out sounding tinny. It's not quite the same as hearing Mr. Stark's voice come out of the suit, but close enough. "Open the wall and let me out." "I'm afraid I can't do that, Peter." Peter lets out a muffled noise of frustration, and Ned turns back to the holoscreen and starts going over the available commands again. There's a command to open the wall, but it doesn't work for him. He doesn't expect to be able to hack Mr. Stark's systems with his paltry hacking skills, but after only a few minutes, he's found a way to circumvent the Peter Protection Protocol by telling the system that the doors need to be opened for maintenance. He doesn't think he would have been able to do that if Peter hadn't given him his gold clearance level. Ned is willing to bet that after this is all over, both of them will have that clearance level revoked. As the door slides open, Peter walks the suit over to the edge and stares out. "Are we really doing this?" Ned asks. Peter is quiet for a few moments, nervous at stepping out into the sky without his web slingers on. "I'm going to get Mr. Stark back." Ned watches, transfixed for a few moments, as Peter takes another half step towards the opening. Finally, he steps out, and the thrusters ignite on his feet and hands. Peter hovers awkwardly in the air for several moments, moving back and forth like he's trying to stand on waves in a storm-tossed ocean. Luckily, he doesn't have to be good at flying, he just has to drop down slowly to the ground floor. Ned only hopes he'll have good enough command of the suit to fire the repulsors and kick some bad guy ass. Peter says something inside the suit that Ned can't hear, and he turns back to the holo display. He taps in a few commands and a comm line opens up so he can hear Peter talking to Friday. Friday is giving Peter a quick rundown of basic flight and repulsor use. Ned wants to turn and watch, but instead he closes the wall in the side of the lab and focuses on his task. Distract the bad guys. Get the jamming signal turned off. He has no idea what to do about the jamming signal, but he thinks he can distract the bad guys. "I need you to relay some messages to the bad guys in the lobby, Friday," Ned tells her. "What would you like to relay to them?" "Just tell them what I type in." Ned starts typing and then looks up at the security feed. "Can you turn the sound on for the security feed?" The AI responds by turning the sound on, and a moment later, he can hear her reading Ned's message to the bad guys. "The money is being transferred." All four of the bad guys laugh. "Looks like somebody wants to save your life," the one holding Mr. Stark says. "Who would have thought? I kind of thought you were a douchebag and no one would care about you. I was just counting on you wanting to save yourself, but this works too." He yanks Tony to the side roughly and then settles in again. The knife is no longer at his throat. Before Ned can think about what he's typing in, he has a message sent and hears Friday relaying it in the lobby. "You're the douchebag, asshat." He can see everybody in the lobby visibly tense up, though a moment later Mr. Stark starts to laugh. He stops abruptly when the knife is brought back up to his throat. "Yeah, want to say that again?" the guy with the knife challenges. Ned's fingers fly over the keyboard. "Douchebag, asshat. He dies, you don't get your money. Anyone gets hurt at all, I burn your money, and then you." "Who the hell?" Knife Guy turns to one of the other masked bad guys and points at the ceiling. "Are you hearing this?" "Probably not his AI. There's someone behind the scenes." "Who am I talking to?" Knife Guy asks, staring at the ceiling. Ned types out, "I'm the guy in the chair." Friday barely has time to relay the message when the front doors of the lobby burst inwards in an explosion of glass and sound. Everyone sitting against the wall screams and shields their faces, and the bad guys scramble away in the chaos. Ned doesn't know which way to look. His eyes flicker from Iron Man stepping in through the broken front doors, to Flash crying like a baby, and then to Mr. Stark, who is fighting Knife Guy. Knife Guy slices Mr. Stark's arm twice, and then finally gets a hold of him again and brings the knife back up to his throat. Peter crunches over the glass in the suit. He doesn't give the other attackers time to react. He raises his right hand and sends off 3 blasts of the repulsor, taking all 3 of them out. Then he aims the repulsor at Knife Guy. "The hell?" Knife Guy breathes. He looks at Tony and then back at the suit. Ned can hear the wheels spinning in his mind. If I have Iron Man, then who is in the suit? There's silence for a second, then another. Everyone waits with bated breath until Peter's tinny voice comes out of the suit. "Give me back my Tony." "Who the hell do you think you are?" Peter blasts him in the shoulder with the repulsor and he goes flying backwards, dropping the knife. No one moves, eyes locked on Knife Guy lying motionless on the ground. One by one, everyone's eyes turn to the suit. Ned is watching Mr. Stark, though. Mr. Stark sucks in a deep breath, and for a moment Ned thinks he's about to start yelling. Instead of shouting, he just lets out his breath and dusts off the front of his blazer. "Kid, why is Ned in my lab?" "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Stark," comes Peter's tinny voice from the suit. "Yeah, not buying it. Friday doesn't call people asshat. Ned!" He calls to the ceiling, and Ned straightens up as though Mr. Stark can see him somehow from the lobby. "I'm revoking your security clearance as soon as I get up there." He looks at the Iron Man suit again and says, "I better not find Ned inside one of my suits. You're in enough trouble as it is." Finally, the faceplate on the Iron Man suit flips up to reveal Peter, and several of their classmates gasp. "Come on, Mr. Stark, you're the one that biocoded me to the suits. This is kind of your fault." Tony eyes Peter warily for a long, quiet moment, and then makes a "come on" motion with his fingers. "Get out. This isn't quite what I had in mind when I set up a field trip for you. You know that, right?" "Maybe I want to take a joyride first," Peter says, taking half a step back, but before he can get far, the suit opens up, probably Friday's doing, and spits him out. He stumbles out, and Mr. Stark catches him before he falls to the floor. Everyone in the lobby watches as he pulls Peter in for a hug, and Peter melts into the embrace. "I saw you and Ned slip out," Tony says. "I had to save you." "That explains a lot, except for why Ned is in my lab." He sighs again. "I was counting on Friday to lock the two of you in an elevator to keep you safe." Peter mumbles something into Mr. Stark's shoulder, but Ned can't hear what. The next moment the holoscreen goes dark and the lab lights come up just enough to see. "Level gold access has been revoked. Stay where you are." "What? Friday, no. Can't I go back to the lobby?" "Stay where you are. You have been instructed not to touch anything." Ned lets out a heavy breath and crosses his arms. He sits down on the stool for a moment and scrunches his face up, unhappy his moment as the guy in the chair is over. Then he looks up at the lab. Friday told him not to touch anything, but she didn't say he couldn't have a look around. A smile comes over his face, and he gets up off the rolling stool. It's time to get a close-up look at the Iron Man suits. Tony has security take Peter's class into a room on the ground floor while paramedics come in and check everyone over. The class of 10 kids sits around a conference table normally used by security staff along with Mr. Harrington. Peter and Tony sit down at the other end. Tony is quiet as they watch paramedics check over each student, and Peter starts to grow nervous that he's in really big trouble. What if Mr. Stark revokes his gold clearance? What if he revokes Peter's access to the lab? What if he doesn't want Peter to come around anymore at all? He's working himself up, and Tony seems to notice, because after a few minutes, he reaches out and puts a hand on Peter's wrist. Peter looks up at him, and Tony clearly reads the worry in his eyes. "It's fine. I'm not mad." "You're not?" "No, you did good, kid. Clearly I need to work on Friday's protocols, though." "You're not mad that I used the suit?" A wary look comes over Tony's face again. Maybe it's not wary, but Peter can't quite place it. It's not a look he's seen Tony wear before. Dark doesn't quite describe it either. "You look mad that I took the suit." "I'm not," he says. His voice is quiet, strained. It doesn't settle Peter's nerves any. "They're all clear, Mr. Stark," one of the paramedics says, and gives him a thumbs up. Tony nods, and the 3 paramedics clear out, leaving Tony, Peter, and the Acadec team by themselves. "So," Tony says, putting his best public persona in place. Peter has always admired how fast Mr. Stark can just flip a switch and become this charming public personality. He knows it's not the real Mr. Stark, but still, Peter would like to know how he does it so he can maybe not be the rambling mess that he is most of the time. But as Peter listens to Mr. Stark talk to his class, he feels like the man sounds off. Maybe it's just the whole ordeal he'd just been through. Having a knife pressed to your throat and your arm sliced open would be stressful for anybody. "I know this wasn't what you expected from a field trip to SI. I understand if you feel like you need to leave and come back another day. If you want to stay and go on the tour as planned, however, you can." Mr. Harrington looks around at his students, gauging their interest and mental state after the hostage situation they all just lived through. Most of the students look eager, though, and no one looks terribly distressed. Several of them mouth quietly, "Please, Mr. Harrington." He looks down at the end of the table to Mr. Stark again. "Are you sure? We completely understand if you need to reschedule." "I'm sure. I need to change clothes, but Peter can take you on a quick tour of some of the lower levels, and then I'll be back to lead it." "Oh," Mr. Harrington says, surprised. "You're leading it? I hadn't realized." "Sure, I set this up for Pete." You mean Peter's actually his intern? Flash asks, mouth hanging open. Peter rolls his eyes. He doesn't know how Flash can doubt it after seeing him blast through the lobby's front doors in an Iron Man suit. Tony eyes Flash, and then his voice grows serious as he puts a hand on Peter's shoulder. He's my personal intern. He works with me in the lab, which is how... His voice grows lighter and a touch annoyed as he looks at Peter and says, he and Ned were able to sneak up there. Mr. Harrington holds up his hand, pointer finger up. Speaking of Ned, where is he? Probably wreaking havoc in my lab. I'll get him and bring him down as soon as I change. Pete, why don't you take them up to PR, and then if I'm not down by the time you're done, take them to the Wave Lab. My clearance isn't revoked? Not yet, he says in a warning tone. Peter reads him loud and clear. No shenanigans. No more wearing the Iron Man suits. If you're sure this is okay, Mr. Harrington hedges, but Tony nods and stands up. It's fine. I'll meet up with you in 20 minutes, Tony tells Peter. He reaches out and puts a hand on Peter's shoulder and disappears out the door. Peter turns back to his class and finds that none of them have moved to stand up. What the hell, Parker? You have access to his Iron Man suits? Flash says it like he's angry. Peter supposes he must be, because Flash has told everyone at school for the last year that Peter is a liar and doesn't have an internship. Now they'll all see that he's the liar. I'm not supposed to? The class bursts out talking all at once, asking Peter questions, but Mr. Harrington stands up and puts a stop to it. We're very lucky to be allowed to continue the field trip after what happened this morning. Right now we've been given instructions to follow, so there's no time for questions. Everyone stand up and form a single file line. I expect all of you to be on your best behavior and to listen to Peter. Peter shoots Mr. Harrington a grateful look and pushes himself to his feet. Do you need anything from us before we get started? Mr. Harrington asks. I was told there would be a security check before we could go past the lobby. Peter holds up his finger and pulls out his phone. He doesn't know if Ned stopped the jamming device or if Friday or Mr. Stark did, but this time when he calls Happy, the signal gets through and he picks up the phone. Peter? Are you back in the tower? Yeah, where are you? In the security conference room. Are you busy? Mr. Stark said we could continue the field trip, but the class needs a security check first, and I don't really want to take them back through the lobby. Stay put. Happy hangs up and Peter puts his phone away. He doesn't know where in the tower Happy is, but figures it could be a while. It's less than a minute before he appears, however, opening the door to the conference room. He has a plastic box full of name tags. Peter guesses it was waiting for them at the security checkpoint in the lobby. Everyone will need to leave their bags and phones here. For now, you can just set them on the table. Happy looks stressed out and in a rush to get back to the lobby, probably to supervise the cleanup. Boss put you in charge? He directs at Peter. For a little while until he gets back. We're going up to PR into the Wave Lab. Happy grunts to let Peter know he heard him as he pulls the clip-on name tags out of the box. The tower has been moved to Lockdown 3, Happy tells Peter. The elevators are working, but the executive levels are still locked down. Got it. Roger Harrington, Happy calls. He doesn't look up as he holds out the plastic name tag, and Mr. Harrington moves past several kids to take it. Clip these to your shirts and keep them on you at all times. Friday will alert security if you remove your badge or move away from Peter or Boss once he gets back. These name tags give you temporary access to the tower as long as you're with one of them or with security. Michelle Jones, he calls, and holds out another tag. When he's out of tags, he looks up and finds Peter looking at him expectantly. He snorts and says, I'm not printing out another badge for you. I know, Peter says. You're banned from badges. Yeah, I got it. Happy eyes him and says, good luck, and then leaves them alone again. Peter turns and finds his class waiting in line like Mr. Harrington told them, looking at him expectantly. So, Peter trails off. If you just want to come this way. Flash mutters, what a joke, under his breath, but no one else hears. Peter doesn't really care what Flash thinks. He leads them out of the conference room and down the security hall. They exit into the lobby, which is still a mess and is full of agents from either the FBI or S.H.I.E.L.D. Peter's not sure. Thankfully, they don't need to cross the lobby, just skirt around the edge to get to the elevator. Once they're all inside and Peter has hit the button to go up to level 10 to visit PR, MJ says, So why are you banned from having a badge, Peter? He turns to her and his face goes red. He'd lost the last one, and a pizza delivery boy had come to the tower trying to use it to deliver pizza to the penthouse, which no one had ordered. Before that, he'd lost 2 other badges, both within the tower. I don't need one. He can't keep his cheeks from turning red under MJ's scrutiny as they rise up through the tower. They're barely done listening to a little spiel in PR about what the PR department does when Tony shows up with Ned in tow. Ned has met Mr. Stark before, but he's trailing behind him now with stars in his eyes. Peter thinks Mr. Stark must not have yelled at Ned too bad when he went to collect him from the lab. Due to the 40-minute hostage situation and the hour they spent in the conference room afterwards, their field trip time is going to be cut short. As a result, Tony decides to skip some of the labs and head for the ones he considers the best. He and Peter had planned this field trip out together and had each picked out labs for the class to visit. Peter notes that 3 of the 4 labs they head to after PR are ones Peter had wanted the team to see. They head to a conference room to have lunch. Tony has pizza waiting there for them. He makes it clear by where he seats himself that he doesn't intend on answering questions while he eats, and Mr. Harrington makes sure the class respects that. Peter is the only one invited to sit with Tony while they eat. Normally, he loves sitting with Mr. Stark, hanging out with him, but just like before in the security conference room downstairs, something feels off. Mr. Stark is quiet and is sitting stiffly like he's uncomfortable. He knows better than to ask if he's okay in front of a group of people that are strangers to Mr. Stark. Instead he asks, "Were you cut deep?" "No." The paramedic slapped a Band-Aid on it. Tony's voice is quiet, stiff, like his posture. Peter doesn't ask him anything else. The class finishes their lunch in just 30 minutes since they don't have time to linger if they want to get to the last lab before their time is up, and they have to take the bus back to school. As soon as they're done eating and step back into the hallway, Tony puts on his public persona again and takes them all to the elevator. "We saved the best for last. Of course, Peter and Ned had to jump the gun and get up there first." "Oh my gosh," Betty says in awe. "Are we going up to your lab?" "That's right. It's time to see where all the magic happens." The class starts to shift around excitedly as they rise up through the tower. Several kids eye Ned like they're just seeing him for the first time, especially since he spent over an hour in the lab, most of that time by himself. From the lobby, they all heard him giving Friday commands to say crazy things to the bad guys, though so far they've held off asking him questions about it. Peter suspects that once they all get back on the bus, it's going to be chaos for him and Ned both. When they get back to the lab, Tony gives instructions about keeping hands in pockets and not touching anything. Everyone but Peter and Ned obey and put their hands in their pockets. Peter knows that all of the dangerous things in the lab have been locked away, and all of the dangerous machines are on lockdown for the tour. He and Tony had spent 2 hours the night before cleaning up the lab in preparation for the field trip. "Let's check out the Iron Man suits first. Everybody gather round," Tony says, leading them to the far end of the lab. "Except you, Pete. You've seen enough of the suits for the day." A little ripple of laughter goes through the class as they gather round. Peter hangs towards the back of the group so the rest of the class can get up close and check out the suit Tony is showing off. Tony's voice is still a little stiff and quieter than normal when he's entertaining people like this. As Ned sidles up next to Peter and whispers, "Dude, I can't believe you flew an actual freaking Iron Man suit," Peter's stomach begins to bubble with worry. Despite that Tony had said he isn't upset with him, Peter wonders if he actually is. A few minutes later, after growing bored answering questions about the Iron Man suits, Tony passes the class off to Peter. Just as they had planned the night before, Peter shows off a drone he's been building, and then what Tony calls a baby AI that he's been helping Peter learn to code. It's not anywhere as advanced as Friday, but it can talk and answer basic questions. At this point, it's little better than a glorified search engine, but Peter hopes that one day it will be as good as Karen or Friday. That is, if Mr. Stark doesn't decide to end the internship altogether. Tony shows the class a few of his workstations, including a state-of-the-art 3D printer and laser cutter combo, and then tells them all it's time to head back to the lobby. "Your things will be waiting for you at the front desk. My head of security says the lobby is all cleared up, so it's safe to pass through." He ushers them out of the lab into the elevator. Peter is half hoping that Mr. Stark will ask Mr. Harrington if Peter can just stay, that he'll add an extra lab day to their schedule since Peter is already here, but Tony doesn't ask, and he doesn't get into the elevator with them to go back into the lobby. "We appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to give us a tour, Mr. Stark, especially after what happened this morning," Mr. Harrington says. He holds out his hand to shake, but Tony doesn't take it. He pretends like he doesn't see the hand being offered to him. He doesn't like to be handed things or to shake hands unless it's with someone he trusts, like Pepper, Rhodey, or Happy. or from Peter, but Mr. Stark is acting so off that Peter isn't sure if he's still included in that list anymore. Not a problem. Peter and I wanted to plan an engaging field trip to show off his favorite labs and projects. I'm glad the incident this morning didn't throw that off. Peter doesn't look up at Tony as he says goodbye again and the elevator door closes. He misses the uncertain look Tony gives him as a result. All the way back down through the tower, the class talks about their day. Even Flash chatters on excitedly about the Iron Man suits and about how he's going to tell everybody that he was given a personal tour of Mr. Stark's private lab. I didn't know you helped plan the field trip, Peter, Betty says. Peter looks up at her and gives a nod. Yeah. I can't believe you're his personal intern, says Seth. That's so cool. You get to hang out in his lab like that all the time? He doesn't give Peter a chance to answer before he rounds on Ned. And dude, you really just raced up to Tony Stark's private lab and then hacked his AI to call the bad guys a douchebag? Ned stands a little taller and pulls his shoulders back. Yeah, it was no big deal, he says, trying to play it cool. He's doing a better job of it than Peter usually does. Peter is glad his friend is in the spotlight for the moment. He needs some time to think. He lets his shoulders hunch a little as they make it back to the lobby. The field trip went great. He's just not so sure that what comes after will. Tony is used to fighting big battles. He's used to crazy things happening in his life. Hell, he's even used to getting kidnapped and held hostage by now. It's happened several times in the last few years alone, not to mention Afghanistan. His life is crazy, so it's not often that something can throw him for a loop these days. Finding out that Peter could access his suits, which were only bio-encoded to him, had thrown him for a big one, though. Come on, Mr. Stark, you're the one that bio-coded me to the suits. This is kind of your fault. He'd bio-coded a suit to someone other than himself before. He'd allowed Rhodey access to one of his older models, and that had resulted in Rhodey taking the suit and leaving, taking it to the military. It's not that he minds his best friend having one, being a war machine, but he had learned from that mistake and had never coded anyone to his suits again. The one time Pepper had worn a suit was when he'd sent the Mark 42 to protect her when their house in Malibu was being attacked by Killian. She wasn't bio-encoded to the suit, and wouldn't be able to use it again unless Tony sent the suit to her again. Tony sighs as he sits in his car, fingers drumming the steering wheel impatiently. He needs to talk to Peter. He doesn't want to, but it has to be done. His anxiety at the coming conversation keeps trying to rise up in his chest and send him into a panic attack. He's been fighting with his anxiety all day, ever since he left the tour group to go change his ripped shirt and retrieve Ned from his lab. He'd taken the opportunity in the penthouse to ask Friday why she'd let Peter access his suit. He doesn't think he'll ever forget her answer. His best hope is to just tell the kid and get it over with. Get all the yelling Peter will do out of the way and hope the kid forgives him. Hope Peter won't want to end lab days. Tony really doesn't want that. The bell rings at Midtown, and a few minutes later kids start streaming out the front doors. Tony has never picked Peter up at school before, so he's not exactly sure how it goes. Usually Happy comes and collects the kid on lab days and then brings him to the tower. It's not a lab day, and Tony isn't sure if Peter will spot him, or if there's another entrance the kid might come out of. He continues drumming his fingers on the steering wheel, heart beating rapidly every time he catches a glimpse of a kid with messy brown hair. It's Ned that he ends up spotting first. Ned has a recognizable haircut and was wearing a dark green Star Wars shirt earlier in the day. Tony twists a little, trying to see around him, and a moment later spots Peter. It takes a moment for Peter to spot him, and Tony is glad he's not going to have to roll down his passenger window and shout from the pickup line. Peter looks confused for a moment, but then says goodbye to his friend and heads over to the car. "Mr. Stark?" he asks, pulling open the door. "Hey, you up for an extra lab day?" Peter's face morphs into a smile. He smiles so big that Tony realizes that before this moment the kid looked almost depressed. Yeah, Mr. Stark, totally." He pulls off his backpack and slides into the front seat, putting his bag on the floor between his legs. He buckles up, and Tony can practically feel excitement vibrating off the kid. He pulls away from the curb, and another car pulls into his place in the pickup line behind them. "You didn't have to come all the way and get me, Mr. Stark. I could have taken the bus." "I should have just had you stay at the tower," he says. The truth is that as soon as the field trip had ended, Tony had gone back to his lab and tried not to hyperventilate. He hadn't been sure at that point if he was going to tell Peter or not. If he told the kid, he had a big chance of losing him. If he didn't think he could live with the weight of that secret. He'd let himself have a mini panic attack for 10 minutes, and then had gone down to the parking garage so he could race to Midtown to grab his kid. "You hungry?" he asks. If he doesn't start a conversation now, he's going to blurt out what he needs to say. He's always thought that he has a great poker face, that he is good at keeping secrets. Turns out he's not when it comes to things like this. Instead, he decides to strike up a conversation about something else. If he can keep his mind busy, he can hold off until they get back to the tower. He really doesn't want to have this conversation in the car, where they're both trapped. "Sure. Burgers and milkshakes?" Peter asks with a hopeful tone. Tony nods and reaches forward to turn on the radio. He turns it up as loud as Peter can usually tolerate and takes them to a drive-thru. For the entire trip back to the tower, his mind spins through all the possibilities of how this might turn sideways on him. He imagines a dozen different things Peter will probably yell at him. Imagines him storming out of the tower and not coming back. "You okay, Mr. Stark?" Peter asks, mouth half full of cheeseburger. Tony takes a moment to think about the question and then realizes that he's breathing hard. "Yeah, fine." Peter stares at him for a moment as they pull into the private parking garage under the tower. "Are you, Mr. Stark, I understand if you're mad at me." Peter's voice falls a little, and his shoulders slump again just like they had as the elevator doors had closed after Peter and his class had left the lab. "Hey, no, I'm not mad, Rue. But I didn't listen to Friday about the protection protocol, and I gave Ned my clearance and you're not going to do those things again. Got it?" Tony says. He eyes Peter for a moment as he pulls into a parking space near the private elevator. He turns the car off and then lets his head fall back against the headrest, staring out the window for a few moments. He definitely can't wait until they get up to the penthouse for this. "Okay, look, I have to tell you something." He glances at Peter and finds him looking tense, but listening. "I'm just going to come out and say it, and then we can get all the yelling you're going to do over with. Just promise me you won't run off. I'll drive you if you want to go home, or Happy can, but I don't want you taking off on your own." "What?" Peter pauses. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, kid. I just found something out today that I wasn't expecting, and I don't think you were either." "What is it?" Peter whispers. His voice is so quiet that Tony startles a minute later when Peter's voice raises and he starts rambling. "Oh my gosh, Mr. Stark, you're not dying, are you? That guy didn't cut you too deep, did he? Do you need a doctor?" "Whoa, calm down. I'm fine. I don't need a doctor." "But you've been acting weird all day, Mr. Stark, and you said you weren't mad at me, so..." Peter trails off, at a loss. Tony takes a deep breath, holds it for a moment, and then lets it out. He looks at Peter and says, "You're my son." He expects Peter to start yelling, to jump out of the car, or tell him what a shitty father he is for not having taken Peter in after his mom and stepdad died in the plane crash when he was 6. Instead, Peter just stares at him. "I'm sorry, I don't think I heard you," he says. "I'm your dad. I just found out today." You mean like, you think of me as a son?" Peter sounds confused, but hopeful, and his tone confuses Tony. "No, I mean, you stepped into my Iron Man armor, which is bio-encoded to my DNA, and then took off with it like you owned it. That's not supposed to happen." But you encoded it to me, for emergencies or something." Peter trails off when he sees Tony shaking his head. No one else has access but me. When I went up to change my shirt before we did the tour, I asked Friday why she gave you access, and she said we shared DNA." Peter sits still. Tony doesn't know when the yelling will start. "So, His eyes grow wide. "I'm a clone?" Tony lets his head fall back against the headrest of the driver's seat again. "Kid, no." He reaches up and runs a hand down his face. "You're killing me here. You're my son. Apparently Friday knew because she has samples of your DNA from the blood we drew when we were trying to find a good painkiller that would work for you a few months back. That's why she gave you access to the suits. She detected that we shared some of the same DNA. You're not a clone. You're my kid." "But how?" "I plan on giving you the birds and the bees talk, but I was hoping not to have to do that today." "Mr. Stark," Peter whines. Then he pauses and his face goes red. I mean, Mr. What do I call you now?" His voice is quiet by the end, barely more than a whisper. Tony doesn't know what to tell him. He wants to be called Dad, has wished for a long time that Peter is actually his kid. Now he has that. His wish has come true as though it has been granted by a genie. He has what he wants, but he doesn't know how to transition into an actual father and son relationship with his kid. His only experience with father-son relationships is what he had with Howard, and he would never classify that as a relationship. Howard had been absent from his life, and when he was around had bullied and belittled him. It's the farthest thing from what he wants to have with Peter. "Kid, you can call me whatever you want," Tony says, "so long as you agree to stick around." "What do you mean?" Tony rubs his face hard again. The kid still isn't yelling at him. He doesn't know why. He does know it's probably not a good idea to tell Peter all the reasons he shouldn't want to be his son, because he doesn't want to give him ideas. He has to, though. Peter needs to know what he's getting himself into. "Look, I'm not exactly dad material. I'm pretty sure I'm guaranteed to be the world's worst father. I didn't even realize I had a son until today. Being my son, being a Stark, isn't easy. We have a family history of being a mess. Then you always have to worry about getting kidnapped or held hostage, like today, and you'll always be in the public eye, and I'm sorry." Peter looks confused for long moments, working it all over in his mind, but then a look of understanding comes across his face. "Oh," he says softly, elongating the word. His eyes come up to meet Tony's. "Mr. Iron... Dad?" he finishes awkwardly. "You think I don't want this?" "No one would want this, kiddo." Peter shakes his head. "No, but I do. Mr. He huffs in frustration. "I already think of you like that. Like a dad, I mean. I figured you didn't, 'cause I'm just some kid you recruited to help you in Germany. I thought you were just keeping me around because Aunt May got mad at you and you felt bad for me or something." "I like having you around," Tony tells him. "If I didn't, I would have just kept it to one lab day a week, and I wouldn't have organized a field trip to prove to your class that you have an internship." Another look of understanding comes across Peter's face. "That's why you did it? You said kids were giving you a hard time about it and calling you a liar." "Yeah, but that's just school. I always get bullied." "Not anymore. I'll talk to the principal." "What? No! You can't do that, Mr. Stark." Tony raises his brows and points at himself. "Dad." Peter's cheeks heat up again. "Okay, but..." "I don't want to be Mr. Stark, your mentor. I want to be your dad, kid, if you'll have me." "Yeah, of course I will. I want that," he finishes quietly. "Okay, then you have to let me be your dad. I don't want you getting bullied at school for any reason." Peter fidgets with his hands and stares at his lap for a few moments. "I don't really know how to do that. I mean, I have May, and she's great, but I haven't had parents in a long time." "May is your parent." "No, yeah, she is, I mean, but..." Peter looks up at Tony, and he can tell his kid is struggling to find the words. "I love May. She's great. She's there for me when she can be, but she's busy a lot. She works all the time, 'cause the apartment is expensive, and I eat a lot of food, and school clothes cost a lot, and..." He sucks in a deep breath, out of air from rambling. "She's great, but it's not like having a mom and dad." Before Tony can ask, Peter keeps going. "She's not available for parent-teacher conferences, or to come pick me up from school if I'm sick, or to go in and talk to the principal if there's a problem. That sort of thing." Tony nods. "Then that's what it'll look like," he tells him. "I'm going to be there for those things and whatever else you need. Look, I don't know how this is supposed to go either. I'm new to this too. We'll figure it out together." Peter looks up at him, a little in awe. "Together?" Tony nods and then smiles. "You sure you don't want to start yelling at me? I'm telling you, being a Stark isn't easy, and I'm not easy to deal with either." Peter grins. "You're great, Mr. Stark. You're not hard to deal with at all." Something about the way Peter says it, the way he looks at him, like he believes in him, thinks the world of him. It makes all the anxiety he's been feeling all day drain out of him, and makes him feel warm. "I'm going to remind you you said that when you're frustrated with me. Hey, maybe tell Pep that I'm not hard to deal with." "I will, Mr. Stark." "Dad, or IronDad," he teases, since Peter had inadvertently called him that earlier. "Mr. Dad?" "Mr. Dad," he laughs. "Even better." "No, come on, that's not fair." "Come on, buddy," Tony says. "Let's get out of the car and up to the penthouse." Peter gets out with his backpack and food trash and follows Tony to the elevator. Dad?" he asks as the elevator door opens and they step inside. Yeah? Having Peter call him Dad is new and exciting and makes him feel warm all over. Are you sure? Sure about what? Are you sure about... He motions between the two of them. This? Us? You're sure we're related? I had Friday run the DNA twice. Peter gives a nod, holding the backpack strap over one shoulder and staring at the elevator door. What? Peter looks up at him. Oh, it's just... May said a few times she thought maybe Richard wasn't my father. She said I didn't look like him, and that she and Uncle Ben hadn't realized Richard was dating. Then one day he called and said he and my mom were getting married and were expecting me. Tony reaches out and rests his hand on Peter's shoulder. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I should have known. I should have been there for you. It's okay, Peter says quietly. It's not. I'm not going to let you down like that again. Peter chokes out a laugh and Tony shifts uncomfortably when he realizes that his son's eyes look watery. She was right, though, Peter says. I'm not Richard's son. After Uncle Ben died, I was always kind of afraid May wouldn't want me anymore because we're not related. Now it turns out I'm not even related to Ben. May loves you. She doesn't care whose son you are. She's not going to let you go for anything. He shifts nervously again. I'm not looking forward to telling her I'm your dad and asking to spend more time with you. You're not? Peter's voice sounds off as the elevator door opens to the penthouse. Should I not tell anyone about this? That's not what I meant, kid. You can tell people. You're not a secret. I just meant I'm not looking forward to getting yelled at. He's worried that she'll accuse him of trying to take Peter away from her and cut off all access to his son. He'll fight for his right to see his kid, but he'd rather not take May to court for custody rights. That wouldn't be good for Peter, and he doesn't want to stress his son out. You know what? Don't worry about it. That's adult stuff. I'll get all of that figured out, okay? Peter's eyes widen. Oh, Mr. Stark, what about Miss Pepper? Tony opens his mouth to tell Peter not to worry about it again when Pepper comes into the living room from the master bedroom. What about Miss Pepper? She asks. Tony and Peter both stand there staring at her, frozen, like two deer caught in the headlights. She points from one to the other and says, I don't know what's going on, but I'm going to have Friday save a photo of this. You're like a mirror image, she says with a smirk. I'm a clone, Peter says. See you later, Miss Pepper. He turns on his heel to head back for the elevator. Tony reaches for him, but grasps empty air as Peter twists away. Kid, he starts. Adult stuff, Peter calls back over his shoulder. I'll be in the lab. He steps back into the elevator, and as he turns around and the doors slide closed, Tony catches a smile on his son's face. Tony turns back to Pepper and finds her relaxing on the couch. You've had quite the day, she comments. Tony moves to the couch and sits down next to her. You have no idea. He's not even talking about the knife to his throat down in the lobby, or Peter and Ned breaking into his lab, or Peter stealing his suit. He can't help but smiling, because he's had the best day possible. The last time he'd had a day this good, Pepper had agreed to marry him. It can't have been too bad, she says. You're smiling. He smiles wider. I have something exciting to tell you. He knows she won't be mad at him. Not for this. She pats the few inches of empty space next to her, and he slides over. He can't wait to tell her and then get down to the lab to spend time with his son.